The censor was an officer in ancient Rome who was responsible for maintaining the census, supervising public morality, and overseeing certain aspects of the government's finances. The census regulation of public morality is the origin of the modern meaning of the words censor and censorship. Early history of the magistracy. The census was first instituted by Servius Tullius, 6th king of Rome. After the abolition of the monarchy and the founding of the republic, the consuls had responsibility for the census until 443 BC. In 442 BC, no consuls were elected, but tribunes with consular power were appointed instead. This was a move by the plebeians to try to attain higher magistracies. Only patricians could be elected consuls, while some military tribunes were plebeians. To avoid the possibility of plebeians obtaining control of the census, the patricians removed the right to take the census from the consuls and tribunes, and appointed for this duty two magistrates, called censors, elected exclusively from the patricians in Rome. It would not be uncommon for the patrician consulars of the early republic to intersperse public office with agricultural labor. In Cicero's words, "In agris erant tum senators, id est scenes." In those days senators, that is, seniors, would live on their farms. This practice was obsolete by the 2nd century. The magistracy continued to be controlled by patricians until 351 BC, when Gaius Marcius Rutilus was appointed the first plebeian censor. 12 years later, in 339 BC, one of the Publilian laws required that one censor had to be plebeian. Despite this, no plebeian censor performed the solemn purification of the people until 280 BC. In 131 BC, for the first time, both censors were plebeians. The reason for having two censors was that the two consuls had previously taken the census together. If one of the censors died during his term of office, another was chosen to replace him, just as with consuls. This happened only once, in 393 BC. However, the Gauls captured Rome in that lustrum, and the Romans thereafter regarded such replacement as an offense against religion. From then on, if one of the censors died, his colleague resigned, and two new censors were chosen to replace them. Election. The censors were elected in the centuriate assembly, which met under the presidency of a consul. Barthold Niebuhr suggests that the censors were at first elected by the curiate assembly, and that the assembly's selections were confirmed by the centuriate, but William Smith believes that there is no authority for this supposition, and the truth of it depends entirely upon the correctness of Niebuhr's views respecting the election of the consuls. Both censors had to be elected on the same day, and accordingly if the voting for the second was not finished in the same day, the election of the first was invalidated, and a new assembly had to be held. The assembly for the election of the censors was held under different auspices from those at the election of the consuls and praetors. So the censors were not regarded as their colleagues, although they likewise possessed the maxima auspicia. The assembly was held by the new consuls shortly after they began their term of office, and the censors, as soon as they were elected and the censorial power had been granted to them by a decree of the centuriate assembly, were fully installed in their office. As a general principle, the only ones eligible for the office of censor were those who had previously been consuls, but there were a few exceptions. At first, there was no law to prevent a person being censored twice, but the only person who was elected to the office twice was Gaius Marcius Rutilus in 265 BC. In that year, he originated a law stating that no one could be elected censor twice. In consequence of this, he received the cognomen of censorinus. Attributes. The censorship differed from all other Roman magistracies in the length of office. The censors were originally chosen for a whole lustrum, but as early as 10 years after its institution their office was limited to 18 months by a law of the dictator Mammicus Aemilius Mamercinus. The censors were also unique with respect to rank and dignity. They had no imperium, and accordingly no lictors. Their rank was granted to them by the centuriate assembly, and not by the curie, and in that respect they were inferior in power to the consuls and praetors. Notwithstanding this, the censorship was regarded as the highest dignity in the state. With the exception of the dictatorship, it was a sacred magistracy, to which the deepest reverence was due. The high rank and dignity which the censorship obtained was due to the various important duties gradually entrusted to it, and especially to its possessing the regimen morum, or general control over the conduct and the morals of the citizens. In the exercise of this power, they were regulated solely by their own views of duty, and were not responsible to any other power in the state. The censors possessed the official stool called a curula chair, but some doubt exists with respect to their official dress. A well-known passage of Polybius describes the use of the imagines at funerals. We may conclude that a consul or praetor wore the purple-bordered toga praetexta, one who triumphed the embroidered toga picta, and the censor a purple toga peculiar to him. But other writers speak of their official dress as being the same as that of the other higher magistrates. The funeral of a censor was always conducted with great pomp and splendor, and, hence a censorial funeral was voted even to the emperors. Abolition. The censorship continued in existence for 421 years, from 443 BC to 22 BC, but during this period, many lustra passed by without any censor being chosen at all. According to one statement, the office was abolished by Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Although the authority on which this statement rests is not of much weight, the fact itself is probable, since there was no census during the 2 lustra which elapsed from Sulla's dictatorship to Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus' first consulship, and any strict imposition of morals would have been found inconvenient to the aristocracy that supported Sulla. If the censorship had been done away with by Sulla, it was at any rate restored in the consulship of Pompeian Marcus Licinius Crassus. Its power was limited by one of the laws of the tribune Publius Claudius Pulcher, which prescribed certain regular forms of proceeding before the censors in expelling a person from the Roman Senate, and required that the censors be in agreement to exact this punishment. This law, however, was repealed in the third consulship of Pompey in 52 BC, on the urging of his colleague Caius Aelius Metellus Scipio, but the office of the censorship never recovered its former power and influence. During the civil wars which followed soon afterwards, no censors were elected. It was only after a long interval that they were again appointed, namely in 22 BC, when Augustus caused Lucius Manatius Plancus and Aemilius Lepidus Paulus to fill the office. This was the last time that such magistrates were appointed. The emperors in future discharged the duties of their office under the name of Praefectura Morum. Some of the emperors sometimes took the name of censor when they held a census of the Roman people. This was the case with Claudius, who appointed the elder Vitellius as his colleague, and with Vespasian, who likewise had a colleague in his son Titus. Domitian assumed the title of perpetual censor, but this example was not imitated by succeeding emperors. In the reign of Decius, we find the elder Valerian nominated to the censorship, but Valerian was never actually elected censor.